And good evening and welcome to Frankly Speaking, where truth is our mission, reality our realm, set as we see it and frankly as well. I'm Joe Spina and
Paul Crowley. Hi Joe, how are you tonight?
Very well. We have a full plate. We're going to cover a myriad of topics today, opening up with something we didn't quite finish off last week, which is raging crime, causes and cures. Are there any? Well, our audience, maybe they can give us some. Go ahead.
You know, I play basketball up in Hamilton, Wenham every Tuesday night through the summer, and I drive up to there, and it's a bedroom community. I leave my car unlocked. I don't worry about whether I was just marveling at people are putting their things on the sideline. I see wallets and money, and people aren't being careless, but they don't worry about crime like we worry about it in an inner city.
Why is that?
I'm not really sure I understand the reason for it, other than to say that crime is probably more prevalent if you are, closer to poverty.
So you're saying if you're in competition with things that you need, food, clothing, whatever, maintenance, that if you can't get them, you use crime in order to get them. So when the immigrants
more inclined to go that way,
yeah. Like when my father and the immigrants came over here, and they didn't have very much, and they're battling for existence. Sometimes they had to skirt the law in order to survive.
What would you call creating a mafia, skirting the law?
My people, yeah, that was skirting in those days. I don't know if that's exactly it. I'm tempted to think that it's a value system. I really think that what we have is a crisis in values in this country. And the Judeo-Christian, and we'll slap in Islamic, because everybody misunderstands. Folks, Islam, Muslim, Judaism, and Christianity all stem from the same place. Abraham, correct?
Yep.
So there are those who may argue that Islam is nothing more than a branch of Christianity, because they acknowledge Jesus, except he isn't the Messiah. Great prophet, but not the Messiah. And the Messiah hasn't come yet, and Muhammad is the latest prophet to go along with the biblical story. So I wish people would understand this, right? So when you put in these standards, they have similarities. Thou shalt not kill. Not a bad rule.
That's a good one, yeah.
Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife isn't a good one.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not steal. It's didactic, what they call didactic. Thou shalt not maybe.
Yeah.
No, it's not marginal.
And they're clear moral principles too. Yeah.
Precisely.
Right.
So when you go to places like Wenham and Hamilton and the suburbs, where they cut their lawn, paint their houses, and maintain things, it's a pride factor.
Right.
All right. Now, if you take away pride, which is one of the interesting things we're going to get to when we talk about globalization and nationalism later on, is that's one of the things that's causing great anger, not only in the United States, but also in the UK. That's Britain, by the way, right?
Yep.
And the reason for it is that a lot of the working middle class has lost the sense of pride. Their jobs have been undermined by immigration, by uneven immigration,
right,
by trade deals, and technology. So they're being neglected, and so consequently they're angry. They have no job security. Wages are stagnant and falling. And who's got solutions for that, Paul? Anybody?
Well, everybody recognizes the problem, but there's not a lot of people coming forward with a plan that's going to work, right?
But if someone says, okay, I see this as a problem, so therefore I'm opposed to NAFTA, I'm opposed to, what is it called, the PTT?
TPP, TTP.
Which is a Pacific, same thing as NAFTA.
Right. It's a globalization of trade, and it's from the United States perspective, I see it as an undermining of its own personal sovereignty, right? Or our own sovereignty as a nation. That's where we talk about the nationalism argument, where and I think to your point, a lot of the globalists don't really talk about the hidden problems of their movement towards globalization, because if everybody understands what's going to happen as we globalize, the loss what is happening, the loss of jobs, the all the points that you just made, people will object, and frankly, that's what's driving a big part of the narrative in this presidential election. Donald Trump is hitting on those raw nerves that that the mainstream media won't talk about, but is a reality for you and me and for.
We'll talk about the mainstream media because that's in one of our segments. I want to get to Lynn, but before we get specifically to some of these Lynn issues, do you recall last year when we were doing a show called The City Voice, and both of us noticed that they had this big barrier in which we couldn't see what's happening at general election, and what they were doing in effect was knocking down buildings. And they purposely made it so you couldn't notice that they were knocking down buildings. That's an exact consequence and result of NAFTA, of globalization. The General Electric, which once supported this city and provided wonderful jobs for your parents.
25,000 jobs, and now 25. We're talking about 2,500 jobs.
Oh, really?
Right.
As a consequence of democratic policies, globalization, and everybody went along with it. And they wonder why they killed the golden goose. We'll get into that. Let's get into the city specifically so that we can get to some of the things that people have written into. They're interested with the ferry. I want to do the ferry, otherwise known as dry docked.
Well, dry docked now because there's no ferry service, right?
Right. But here's the thing. I don't know if, Pedro, we get that picture up there of the way it was, then, as opposed to now. If you take a look at the way it was then, Paul, there's a beautiful picture of Jimmy Cardell and Governor Deval Patrick ready to cut the ribbon with our mayor here, and Tom McGee and Fennell. They're all smiling with a big ship in the background. The ferry service has been initiated. Whoa! 2 years later, there's a picture, and I call it now, of Cardell, someone who I don't know, Moulton, and Tom McGee, no boat in the background, no ribbon to cut. They got a depressed look on their face.
Right.
Oh, but what they're celebrating, $4.5 million federal grant, maybe state and federal grant, to purchase a ferry.
Right.
But no time certain, no date on it. Why would you purchase a ferry in which there's no ferry service?
Well, in government, I guess I would, just to play devil's advocate here a little bit, I know where you're going with this, but I'd just like to say that, from a government's perspective, you get what you can when you can, and that's a reality that municipal and state workers and elected officials are faced with. If you have a chance to get the money to buy a boat, and you don't have the resources to operate that boat, you get the boat and you worry about that later.
Oh yeah.
I remember, in fact, speaking of Jim Cardell, I remember he saying something. He was quoted in the paper back in the early 2000s when they did the overlay district in the downtown, and a lot of the people were complaining that it was going to create all kinds of parking problems in the downtown. And he said that's probably the thing that we root for the most, is that we have parking problems. If we have parking problems, that means the downtown is becoming more robust and so forth. So many times government behaves in a way that says, we need to take what we can get when we get it and kind of focus on the other stuff later. And that brings us to the problem of the operating budget of the ferry,
which is the key.
Which is the key to all this thing. Right. And, full disclosure here, I am a member of the Seaport Economic Council.
From the state.
The state, which is
agency.
chaired by Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito. And I represent the North Shore, but most importantly, I represent Lynn. And the key has always been to, try to, go back to the first photo where they got the money to do the dredging and build out acquire the land and do all the work that they did down there to be prepared for a ferry. A lot of money went into that as well. The premise was to get a ferry, and the premise always was that it wasn't going to be self-sustaining, and there was going to need to be some type of subsidy.
Oh, let me stop you on that. So from the very onset, it was never looked at as a profitable operation.
No.
So the fees are irrelevant. So when they start throwing figures at me that they started with 13,000 riders and in 1 year they jacked it up to 14.5, that's irrelevant.
Well, so let me say this. So you can talk about how many we got 13,000 the first year, 15,000 the second year, and hopefully,
I got you.
we got nothing this year, but hopefully the next year it gets higher and so forth. There was kind of preconditions on all this stuff. As we were talking about, you have to take what you can when you can. So I don't remember what the numbers were, but I know that back in the Deval-Patrick administration, when they were getting this money, and Steve Wallace was involved back then, along with Tom McGee and Jim Cowdell, they were trying to, justify it so that they could get the funding to do the work to prepare for it. And they had some expectations of what the ridership would be. Because when it comes right down to it, what you have to say to yourself is, okay, we have limited transportation resources. If it costs $20 for somebody to get to work, or for the state to subsidize the subway system for somebody to get to work, but it costs $50 to subsidize the ferry for somebody to get to work, you have to do a balancing act.
I see that.
So
I would argue, why should we subsidize anybody going to work?
So some of the folks who are opposed to traffic jams would people who don't want to deal with the traffic and the smog and the greenies.
Then pay for it. Yeah. Then pay for it, Paul. It shouldn't be subsidized. I mean, if you want, the whole point of the matter, subsidies means those folks out there, those taxpayers who aren't getting any benefits whatsoever, are paying for something that they don't use. I have a problem with that.
And I do too. So, and let me talk about, I think that there's a lot of, frustration locally in Lynn from a lot of people who are disappointed that the state decided not to fund the operations for this year. And I wanted to point out something very important, if I can, and that is that when I was put on this committee, they had changed the dynamics of it. They spent a lot of time reworking this commission in terms of what would be acceptable funding purposes. And one of them is that there needed to be, as they put it, an economic impact in the area. And that gets to your point. Instead of it being exclusively a subsidy, let's find a way to, we'd be willing to subsidize things that are going to have further economic impact in the areas that they're in. So what I was told and what I was charged with as the North Shore representative was to encourage that any submissions from the North Shore would focus on some economic impact. And I don't believe that we currently have a proposal that the state has reviewed that has enough economic impact. And that's the thing that we have to fix. If we fix that, we will get some money.
We'll see about that. I noticed that we had our producer put up a Facebook comment. Is that a Facebook comment that we're receiving now, or is it one that we got in the past? Okay, we had one here, and it had to do, first of all, I want to say to, we had Tommy Goff on last week, who is not a candidate, by the way, for sheriff. So let me clear that up. What was that comment there?
A fellow by the name of Ralph says that the problem is that we are $300 million short in the state budget. Who was responsible for not putting it in the budget? Would like to see the commuter line beefed up and the crosstown bus to Boston come back. That is what will bring us up to par and help with building up the waterfront. These services run all year. And that's another thing. I hadn't even thought about that in that conversation. The ferry, while it's the idea, the premise is good and all that kind of stuff, it's only for like 3 or 4 months a year. It's got to be in warm weather, and there wasn't, I suppose at some point they might be able to go year round, but the intention is to do it in the warm weather, and I can imagine there's going to be less interest in taking the ferry on a cold, winter, windy day, in January and February.
Have hot cocoa, maybe,
So
there's also something else I want to say. Thank you, Ralph, for this, by the way. It says, nice job, by the way, guys. It's hard to fill an hour when you have no calls. Well, that's true, but we hope to get calls and go live at some point.
I'm really looking forward to that, so we can get all of our regulars. And by the way, I had one of our regulars approach me late last week, and I'd like to maybe clarify some things.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
something you said may have. Go ahead, clarify.
So I guess it's important to understand that when I use the term liberal in my conversation, I'm usually speaking, you know, about a frustration I have with the behaviors of some political types. And I say, well, the liberals do it this way. I need to make a point that when I use that term, I'm referring to a certain element within the liberal system. It's the establishment. It's the politicos who, you know, insist on maintaining the power for them and their party. It's the media who has a stranglehold on information.
Well, let's redefine it then. Let's call them the elites.
Okay, so please understand that when I'm referring to liberals, I'm not denigrating anybody who has a liberal philosophy, because I have a lot of liberal leanings myself, whether you believe it or not. I tend to not be, you know, the perfect description of a conservative. I have conservative leanings when it comes to fiscal type things, and I have liberal leanings when it comes to social type things. So you really can't paint anybody with a broad brush. But,
well,
so where I have my trouble, though, and it's important, is that there are a number of people, organizations, and party affiliations that are not designed to improve the quality of life of the people. It's designed to maintain their power structure. And that's the stuff that bugs the crap out of me. And when I'm referring to that, that's what I'm referring to. And I just hope people at home recognize that and don't take it personally.
Browbeat you?
Unless, of course, you are one of those elites who takes that as...
I think if you reterm it elites, and that's fair, because I don't have any room in my sympathy for what are known as rhinos, you know?
Yep.
I have no sympathy for what is known as compassionate conservatives, when I have no idea what that means, right? I'm opposed to those who want to take that value system and pervert it, that are relativists. A liberal, by classical definition, is precisely what you are, Paul, and perhaps what I am by best definition. Basically, a libertarian is someone that is, the individual is the most important unit. You can't take away those personal liberties. We're not part of a herd. I'm opposed to the concentration of power and trying to homogenize all mankind into ants and geese and whatever. You know, you can't tell one from another. That is what that's 1984. That's Big Brother.
It's a perversion of the term equality, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's equal opportunity that we should be.
Not equal-like outcomes, opportunity.
Equal opportunity.
And we're going to do a show on where opportunity has gone astray on this country. So I think we have to do it. And folks, conservative is a wonderful term. Conserve is a good thing. That means to preserve, not to be random at things. So someone who's conservative is one who preserves the planet for the future.
Right. That's why when I say things like, you know, I worry about the pension systems, local and state pensions that are underfunded, because I'm concerned. And, you know, as long as you're getting your check every month as a pensioner, you know, you don't have anything to worry about. But if anything were to happen and that money was not available and they shut off your pension, then what would you do? And
get dry docked like the ferry.
And I'm not here to be a fearmonger. I'm not suggesting that the pension systems are going to dry up overnight. It's not true at all. But the fact is that the policies that tend to go on and on and on are ones that reduce the viability of these long-term systems.
So you're telling me, at some point, the system's going to go fail.
Yes.
All right, so let's not play games. The point of the matter is, it's not underfunded, it's not even funded. Okay? You pay tax dollars, folks. You're paying your tax dollars, which you're going to pay my check and those of other retirees.
And 10% of the city of Lynn's budget, approximately 10% of the
is unfunded pension liabilities.
No, it actually goes to fund a future, somebody who hasn't even retired yet's pension.
Exactly.
You know, and
10%, which is a big figure.
Right, and as that number grows, you know, it gets harder and harder for it crowds out the services like DPW and fire and police and teachers.
And it also does something else, Paul. And this is all part of the equation. And folks, understand this. That General Electric taking a hike from the city of Lynn has left us with a big vacuum when it comes to being able to
Commercial
develop tax
base.
dollars
Right.
in order to pay for the things you're talking about.
And remember what we talked about back then when they were raising those buildings.
Yeah.
Why would they raise those buildings? They weren't using them, so you can see why they might raise them. But the fact is that if the property is not improved, the tax base is based on unproved,
No buildings.
right.
They're not paying on the buildings, right? So
Right.
if I turn around and blow my house up, I only have to pay taxes on the land.
Right.
Exactly. Moving on to another topic, local topic, quickly, is medical marijuana, and apparently, is this just what the doctor ordered, or good idea, bad idea? Is Lynn trying to get involved in being a dispenser? Let me ask you this, Paul. You're in a nonprofit in which you have a lot of folks that have to drive vehicles. I'm probably pretty sure that if they have to take a drug test and if anything shows up, they're not going to get the job. Is that correct?
Not only that, but if we have a random drug test, which we have a program for that, because we have to make sure that our drivers are safe out on the road. So we have a random drug program. And if somebody smokes marijuana for medicinal purposes,
Right.
as they say, and I've heard this many times, I guess it's true, that when you smoke marijuana, it stays in your system for 30 days, or thereabouts. So let's say that somebody is involved in a traffic accident. One of Gliss vans is involved in a traffic accident. As a proactive response to that, we immediately send all of our drivers for drug testing as part of the process. It's a fair
wise
thing to do.
management.
Right, and it's built into the contract and all that kind of stuff. Now, if somebody goes for this and is somebody who has a medicinal purpose for ingesting or smoking marijuana, but they smoked it on the weekend for their knee pain or whatever it is, they have it in their system. How do we, as an employer, react to that when they say, well, I have the right to smoke it and I don't smoke it while I'm driving? We have to believe them. I'm not sure, how do you deal with that?
All right, well, here's what I want to get to. Everybody is worried about, in Orlando, the whole gun thing has come back again, okay? Well, we got to do something about guns. They're quick to do that. Should a person, and here's the question for you folks out there to think and contemplate, should a person who's on medical marijuana prescribed because of a condition, and that's sad, should their license be revoked? Should they not be permitted to drive an automobile?
Well, I'm not sure that that's a good solution. By the way, let me point out something,
Yeah.
and I think that a bigger issue with this whole marijuana thing, and I read this, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago. There was a doctor who was prescribing, because if you want to smoke or use marijuana for medical purposes, medicinal purposes, you have to go to your doctor. The doctor writes you out a prescription or whatever, and then you have it. There was the second doctor in the state of Massachusetts to be suspended. I don't know if suspended from practicing medicine or suspended from issuing medical marijuana prescriptions, because he issued over like 5,000 of them. He became the guy you go to if you want to get this. So what does that mean? Anybody who wants to be able to smoke marijuana and buy it from one of these medical marijuana facilities, all they have to do is go see this one guy. He'll write you out a thing, and you're all set. You get your card, and then you can go and you can buy
And
it
everybody's
legally.
going to look the other way because they want to do business.
But they suspended this guy because they felt that he was abusing it. He was probably charging an office visit, and he was ringing up, getting plenty of money for doing it, and he didn't really care what your concern was, because I'm not sure everybody really needs medical marijuana.
All right, so take a guy like that. Now, I want to use this in mindset, folks, when we talk about guns and all these regulations people want to do. They love laws. They think they're going to solve that. So, if a doctor prescribes medical marijuana freely, as this guy did, not necessarily, and that person ends up in a car accident and kills somebody, is that doctor liable as an accessory to whatever?
I think the jury is still out on that, and frankly speaking,
Yeah.
since that's what we do here,
I like that.
the bottom line is that and this gets back to what you were saying about the state. They love to pass laws. They basically pass these laws, and then they figure out all the unintended consequences, and then they have to create laws to counteract them and all this kind of stuff. We really don't know what how to deal with people who have a medicinal right to smoke marijuana, yet that smoking could impair their ability to do their job. You know, so those are very serious issues. And by the way, I just want to point out one thing. You know, the reason we have medical marijuana in the state of Massachusetts is because there was a referendum, and I think most people know this, but it's probably worth pointing out. There was a referendum, so the voters of Massachusetts voted. The majority came forward and said, we want to allow medical marijuana. That's why we have the rules that we have.
But it's coming back on this November ballot, and yesterday or today it's going before the Supreme Court, because there are a couple of agencies or thoughts who want to make sure it doesn't get on the ballot. They're opposed to it, the initiative, on crazy grounds. One of them has to be, you have to be 21. Anybody under 21 is excluded. Right. And they feel that somehow improper.
Well, two things on that. So, first of all, it's coming up on the ballot again to extend it from medicinal only to recreation. So it's going to be like,
oh really?
Like Washington State and Colorado.
Oh, okay.
But what was interesting as well is they issued a study came out, because apparently it's been 4 years now in Colorado, and all the opponents of doing this are afraid that our youth are going to, have greater access to it, more likely to smoke.
And they're right.
It's a gateway drug.
And they're right. Yeah.
But according to the study that they did, the change from 2011 to 2015 in terms of people who, what they did is they surveyed students, high school students or whatever.
Yeah, go ahead.
And in 2011, approximately 22% of those surveyed admitted to using marijuana. And in 2015, that number has actually gone down slightly, but it has gone down. So the concerns that it's going to cause a spike upward appears to be unfounded.
Do you believe in the tooth fairy?
No.
And I don't believe in that survey. Whoever pays the freight on a survey gets whatever results they want. There is a vested interest in having a skewed result, because there are a lot of folks making a lot of money.
So can you at least say that you don't know if you can trust the survey, as opposed to saying you don't believe it?
It's going to be difficult for me to make that qualification, but I will.
Because what if it was an objective evaluation? If you looked at everything about it and found out it to be objective, would you
That's a different issue. If I want to know who paid for the survey, I want to know, have there been other surveys done, research done, that counteract. It's like global warming.
Right. So
if you want to justify global warming, you can find anybody in the world to say, oh, yeah, absolutely.
But my point is that while everything you said is exactly true, you don't have enough information to conclude whether this is a valid survey or not.
But here's my point. If in fact in 2011, pre-legalization of marijuana in the state of Colorado, high school kids were saying, okay, 21% of us admit to taking a puff, right?
Yeah.
And you're telling me that after they legalize it, later, now that it's available and there's no sanctions against it, that actually went down, defies my logical syllogisms. You get what I mean?
Uh-huh.
So that's it. Now, I could be wrong.
I could be wrong. Isn't it still illegal for youth in Colorado?
Is it?
I don't know.
I don't know.
That gets back to the question of, under 18, under 21, or something like that, to because I, frankly, as a parent, don't want my kid smoking pot, period.
Of course not. It shrinks the brain. There's a lot of other things.
Yep.
Now, I want to go to do a little cleanup from last week. We were dealing with raging crime, and we were talking about a little bit about what happened in Orlando. And I came to think, and I'd like your comment on this and your thoughts out there also. They're all gung-ho about guns. They don't want to talk about jihadism, but they want to talk about guns. Or they want to talk about homophobia, but they don't want to talk about anything else. In a month, in any given month of the year, if you just take the weekend, death toll and mayhem are caused by guns in the city of Chicago. It exceeds what took place in Orlando. Do you understand that? So nobody's saying a word about that.
So said another way, if you count up all of the deaths and injuries due to gun violence in the city of Chicago,
only on weekends,
for 1 month, it exceeds what happened at Pulse down in Orlando.
Exactly.
And you know, certainly there's an amount of sensationalism and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But your very astute observation here is the elites, which you were talking about before, those who are controlling the conversation and the narrative and so forth, will over and over and over again say that because of what happened down in Orlando, that we need to get rid of guns. Mm-hmm. But they don't say what's happening in Chicago should lead us to that same conclusion. And I don't understand that, other than to say that the last thing that the elites want the general public to know is what's going on in Chicago.
Very good.
Right?
Not only that, here's the auxiliary to that, all right? They also have some of the toughest gun laws in the country.
Right. So I want to ask you at home, you folks at home that watch ABC, NBC, and CBS, I want you to you know, just watch, as you're watching it for the next week to 10 days, see if you see any discussion about the massive gun violence in Chicago or in any of the other like areas like Baltimore or Oakland where gun violence is.
I want to see if Black Lives Matter says anything about it.
Yeah. So and the reason I say that is because I think it's really important for you to understand that when you rely on ABC, NBC, and CBS for the news, you are getting a biased opinion. They are keeping things from us as a society because it doesn't fit their narrative of globalization and, you know, kind of take away the guns, all that kind of stuff. That's what they wanted to.
They want to get rid of the Second Amendment, Paul.
They do.
It's that simple. And I don't own a gun, folks.
Neither do I.
All right. Which moves us right to a great point. And Pedro, one of the great directors and producers of all time, is going to throw up on that screen Sharon Atkinson. Do you know who Sharon Atkinson was? You
Yes.
get that over there?
Big time
There's
reporter
a quote
for
from
ABC.
her, and below her quote is an even better quote from Casey. I think it was Bill Casey, who was back in the Reagan administration, was in the CIA.
Right.
And Paulie, if you do me a favor, because I can't see the screen, would you read over what Sharon Atkinson, that's contemporaneous. That happened this month that she made this statement.
On June 7th, she said this. Now, just for clarity, you've probably seen Sharon Atkinson. She was a former CBS investigative reporter, hard news type of person.
Hard news.
She goes after the story. She's like a dog on a bone. She figures out all the sides of it and reports it. And the reason she's not on CBS is because she was doing just that.
Exactly.
She was following up their narrative, so they got rid of her. All right, so she's now has her own show, and she continues to do this investigative reporting, and you know she's at a different venue.
So what did she say there?
So this is a quote from her: "Elites have become adept at controlling media narratives, going so far as to ostracize reporters who veer from a particular narrative. It's certainly happening here in the United States," says Sharon Atkinson, former CBS investigative reporter.
Let me stop you on that. You and I are just local guys trying to mission our truth and deal in the realm of reality.
Yes.
And say things as we see them, and we do it frankly. There are those who like to ostracize us for doing that.
Right.
They don't want us to have a voice. They don't want us to point out some realities to them, right?
And you know, how many times, I mean, you know, we did this in this show in another form for a couple of years, and now we're doing it again in this form. And how many times do you come across people that talk about how much they like the show and appreciate
all
our
of the
honesty?
Time.
Same with
and
me.
I don't mean this egotistically
either.
No,
but the fact is that people were watching the show and they felt informed, and the fact is that they were getting information that they couldn't get from any of the national media.
They like truth. People like truth. Look, I make mistakes, folks, And if I do and you call me on it, I'm a fool if I don't recognize it and apologize or move on.
Right.
Recognize. So, you know, if I'm not going to deny reality and the truth when it's presented to me. And like I said, I'm fallible. So aren't you, Paul?
Yep. No question
now, what
about
did Casey have to say, which is really this is back in 1981, mind you, during the great Reagan years.
This is really scary.
And this is the CIA guy, head of the CIA.
Right. So, you know, I'd like to kind of set it up a little bit and talk about Sharon Atkinson. You know, what she's saying here is that the elites control the media and they control the narrative, and we're only hearing what they want us to hear. It's basically what it is. So the natural next step to that, and by the way, if you're paying attention to what's been going on recently, you've got the Obama administration, you've got the FBI, and you've got the State Department giving out bad information, changing history, right? We could talk a little bit about the changing of history, where they're taking a video of a conference call with Josh Earnest or with the spokesman for the Secretary of State's office, and they ask a question and they don't really want anybody to know what was said, so they strip it out of the record.
They did.
So the history is gone.
Right.
They did the same
they did
thing.
it.
What's the thing? They did the same thing with the Orlando thing. They didn't want to tell everybody what was in the 911 thing because it mentions ISIS and it mentions Islam and so forth. So they stripped that stuff out, and the outcry was.
Well, they trotted out Loretta Lynch, just like they trot out Susan Rice, to tell the public lies.
Exactly.
So, isn't something wrong with that?
Right. So that's the setup. So just so you know that the administration, they are part of the elite core, and then the media, big money that runs the media. Who's the guy that owns the New York Times?
Oh, Carlos Slim.
Carlos Slim, one of the richest people in the world. He actually controls the narrative for the New York Times.
More importantly, he's a Mexican national.
Right. So he's gonna say what he's gonna do. And you're not a racist, though, are you? For saying Mexican?
Well, I hate to say this to folks. Carlos Slim himself is not ethnically Mexican. He's a citizen of Mexico who came from Lebanon.
Right. So
he's Lebanese.
So there you go.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we got all the stuff going on, all this misinformation going on, and here's what William Casey, former CIA director under Ronald Reagan, said in 1981. This is scary stuff, but I'm going to say it. We'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the American public believes is false. How's that? That's
when they think that Hillary Clinton is competent, that's a perfect example of false reality.
So here's a guy who basically is involved in disinformation. It's been going on for years. It's nothing new. It's just getting worse. I think it's not.
This is 1981.
Right, 30-something years ago. So, but the point is that the disinformation is ongoing, and now it's getting more and more.
It's almost complete with the internet and all.
And with what happened when Loretta Lynch goes on all the Sunday talk shows and telegraphs that she's going to be doing it, to me that was a trial balloon to see if they could get away with it. Because if they could get away with it under that form, they can do it even more aggressively. As it turned out, I think cooler heads prevailed, and they pulled back. Still, they didn't completely do what they should have done, but nevertheless, they did that. So, but it's really important to remember that the stuff that we're hearing as a society in the aggregate is all lies.
Most of it is. And for years, by the way, Paul, would you agree that the Washington Post has been pro-liberal and certainly pro-Democratic Party?
Absolutely.
But in this year, it's gone particularly over the edge against Donald Trump. He can't stand. By the way, the guy that owns the Post is the guy that owns Amazon.com.
Right. Yeah, Bezos, yeah.
Yeah, and Bezos is upset because Donald Trump said, by the way, you don't pay taxes. Oh, he flipped on that one because you're good old liberal.
Yeah, and the bottom line is, and this gets back to, our conversation about the elites, controlling the narrative. Donald Trump is, while he may be a very wealthy individual, he is not part of that insider elite crowd.
In any way, shape, or manner.
In any way, shape, or manner. Very
Listen
well
to
said.
this. Apparently, there's a guy who wrote an article. His name is Virgil. I don't know if that's his whole name, but he goes, Virgil was a great Roman statesman way back when. So apparently it's a euphemism. I don't know whether it's a pseudonym or whatever. But he wrote an interesting article in which he said that opinion in the Washington Post, and for that matter, New York Times, and all the television stations you mentioned, opinion is being disguised as journalism today.
Right. So in other words, so what you mean by that is what used to be in the op-ed section. You go there to get somebody's opinion, and a Washington Post would be decidedly Democrat and liberal in their opinion. It's showing up on the front page in what is being
supposedly reporting
hard news.
It's really opinion. And for example, he said the Washington Post espouses what is known as a neocon hawkish foreign policy, which is the neocons happen to be Bill Kristol and Claude Heimer, and all that. There's a group of Republicans who made their bones on being neocons, what they call, and they have a very hawkish, warlike mentality. So in effect, the Washington Post has the same.
So you got to help me with that, because I've always struggled with what actually a neocon is. It's neoconservative, right?
Yeah.
And
a new conservative.
A new conservative, where they've really, much like we were talking about earlier with the liberals, they've really changed what a conservative is, right?
In a sense, they're a new brand, and they're basically foreign policy guys. Interventionists. Right. They're the ones that talk the Bushes into
Kristol, wasn't he the guy that was going to? He was a never Trump guy, and he was going to bring out a third.
Oh, there's a bunch of them. Mitt Romney, Mitt Romney would be a neocon. I don't know what he is anymore. But anyways, they have a absolute disdain for Trump. Now, here's a Washington Post editorial, and I want you to comment. Folks, listen to this carefully. The overwhelming consensus among American political and national security leaders has held that Putin is a pariah who disregards human acts and has violated international norms in seeking to regain influence and territory in the former Soviet bloc. Okay. So why is it that they have such a hawkish, negative view of Putin and Russia?
I guess for starters, you can be concerned that they're going to, do what they did leading up to and including World War II, where they were taking.
Oh, yeah, but in World War II, they loved the Soviet Union. They were more than happy to line up with the Soviet Union
against Germany. Yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah, that was fine. But actually, Russia potentially is a greater ally of ours today than back then. Here's the difference.
That's an interesting point. So, let me just ask you about that. So, Russia, probably is more nationalistic, at least in its attitude today, than the United States is currently. The United States is actually moving in that direction, but we have a globalistic kind of administration now, right? But Putin is much of a nationalist.
He's a nationalist.
How much?
So aren't the Chinese?
How many of all the refugees that are coming out of like Syria and so forth? How many are ending up in Russia? None. Is that true?
Probably.
So very few?
Probably zero.
Probably zero.
Just the same amount that's getting on their way to China.
Right. And in China, the same kind of thing. Mm-hmm. They're kind of nationalistic. And I think your point is we have more in common with Russia and China than we have in opposition to them, right?
Well, of course, because as Virgil pointed out, and I'm going to give Virgil all the credit in the world, he says a huge chunk of the 1.6 billion Muslim do not particularly like the United States. Their attitude toward the United States is not that good. So instead of us barking up that tree, oh, we have to be friendly with them, listen to Hillary, listen to Obama, oh, we can't offend them, maybe we'd be better off cozying up and make friends with the non-Muslim world. And in that way, we could actually defeat ISIS. So what he's arguing is that the elites in our country can't stand Putin because he's a nationalist, as opposed to Stalin, who was an internationalist. Don't forget, communism was a malevolent global ideology,
right,
which the elites are in favor of.
Right.
You notice the word malevolent?
Right.
It means bad, folks.
Right.
It means bad. So they don't like Putin for that. Now, what does Donald Trump say? He says, geez, I can get along with Putin. You know why? Because they're both nationalists.
Right.
Okay? And Donald Trump recognizes, forget the reset that Hillary did. Remember the reset button with Putin?
Yeah.
Well, what Trump is saying is, hey, let me sit down and bargain with him. If we can't make a deal, see you later. But we need some help against these crazies and the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley.
Right.
And go ahead.
The idea that, you know, and Romney said during the 2012 presidential election cycle that he thought that Russia was our biggest enemy.
Of course.
And that's because he's a neocon, as you pointed out.
Of course.
But if you take the attitude that we should be aligning ourselves with people who are thinking the same way as us, and we become, you know, we say we have Donald Trump as our next president who has a very nationalistic attitude, and we essentially have a nationalistic, I think we have at least a very close to a majority of the people who would prefer to be nationalistic. What do you think about that? What do you think the American people, do you think they're majority nationalist or globalist?
Let's put up the contrast between the two, and let people look at it for themselves.
There you go.
What separates a globalist from a nationalist, and see how you feel. Look, where you put yourself. What do you agree with? I mean, look at it. It's really quite simple. Is that up there on the screen? And Paul, would you go down to the light blue one?
Yep.
And just contrast it. I don't have it in front of me.
Okay, so globalism supports mass immigration,
which is happening now.
Right, and nationalism opposes mass immigration and free trade.
Go ahead.
And globalism supports free trade. Globalism wants to have a global superstate, which would basically be a world order. Is that fair to say? Which
is where Obama wants to go next,
right.
The United Nations. Right. He wants to be the ruler of the world order.
Right.
I mean, he's got a vision. He's really messianic in his mindset.
Right. But nationalism says that United States and other countries would have their own sovereignty for the people in their country, which kind of goes away with globalization. If the United Nations is deciding the fate of the world, they're going to basically tell the United States what they can and cannot do.
They're telling the city of Lynn that we're a refugee city.
Right.
Well, Mayor Judy Kennedy saying anything about it, and our Kale, our president, nobody in the city can do a thing about it. They've already taken away our sovereignty.
Right, and they're going to continue
to do it. That's globalization.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead. So, at a great cost, by the way.
Globalism believes all races and cultures should blend into a mono-race and monoculture.
What's that mean?
So,
we're nobody. We lose our identity.
Right. There's no Irish, Italian.
Oh, forget that.
Yeah. So, but nationalism believes in maintaining uniqueness of individual races and cultures. Sure, we want to have all of them here, but we want to maintain those cultures, right?
Paulie, I think there's a subset to that talks about individuality also. The nationalism is individualistic, the primacy of the individual.
Right.
Let me give you an analogy when I was a young man of immigrant background, where they used to say that we're a melting pot. Now, a melting pot would mean you take tin, you take this, and you blend it all together, and you come up with a new alloy, right? Right. Melt it down and form one. Un pluribus on a dollar bill. Uno pluribus, whatever. But a better definition of the United States was we're like a salad bowl. We're a salad, but we're still lettuce, tomato, onion, and cucumber.
Right.
All right? I kind of like that one. That's globalism. Globalism says, we can get along. We can coexist, and that's another one we can throw up there. What is coexistence? What is this thing called mundus vivendi? And that's an interesting term. And defined, it's an arrangement or an agreement. I have it here. I don't know if it's up on the screen. Allowing conflicting parties to coexist peacefully, either indefinitely or until the final settlement's reached, like your marriage and my marriage, and your marriage out there, right?
Right. Well, that's kind of like the Palestinian question, right?
Exactly. Right. Now, right beneath that, I don't know whether we have that graphic up there. Do we have Norman Peale there saying, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore?
Oh, yeah, I remember that, yeah.
Well, you see, that's the antithesis of coexisting. You can coexist to a point, but if it's so one-sided and you have to say something and you're frustrated, you're not going to take it anymore. That's what's happening, not only here, but in the UK. Okay. The UK tomorrow is going to make a vote.
Right, the Brexit.
And to do what?
To secede from the Union, the European Union.
Why? Because they've lost their identity. Right. Who is opposed to that, Paulie?
Probably the single biggest globalist in the world and the most menacing man I've ever seen.
And his name is?
George Soros.
Oh.
So,
24th richest man in the world.
right. So, and he's the guy that almost
Crippled Britain.
crippled Britain in 1992 by betting against their currency.
He's not a nice man.
No.
All right. So if
And
he's
and by the
for
way,
something,
we should automatically say, I'm
be
going the
against
other
it,
way.
right? Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's Media Matters. He's in Hillary's camp 100%.
And he pushes the globalist narrative, and he doesn't want anybody to talk about Chicago on the weekends, and he doesn't want to talk about, you know, the virtues of nationalism being good for creating jobs in this country and that kind of stuff, because he doesn't want it. He wants to basically be able to sell his stuff to everybody unencumbered.
That's the same thing with Google. That's the same thing with Amazon. That's the same thing with Carlos Slim. That's the same thing.
By the way, you know, the most recent generation of elites has to be the controlling people at Facebook, Google, Yahoo, and so forth. Collectively, they scare the daylights out of me because they know everything about us.
Plus, they can give disinformation.
Yes.
Just what Casey warned against, right?
Right.
That becomes the reality. Understand something. They don't care about the United States.
Did you ever hear?
They're globalists.
Did you read that story? For all you folks who Google, I mean, that is the term that everybody uses. I do it all the time. You Google something so you want to learn about, somebody brings up a topic, you say, I'm going to learn about that. So you Google it and you get all this information. When you Google, as you start typing in the words, it kind of puts up what it thinks you're asking for so that you can go to it, right?
Yeah,
and that's kind of an algorithm of sorts, right? When you put up Hillary Clinton, IND, which will talk about the Hillary Clinton indictment, potentially that should be one of the things that pops up.
Yeah.
It doesn't come up. All that comes up are things that are very positive to Hillary Clinton. Why?
They did it intentionally.
They did it intentionally. So this business that it's a naturally occurring algorithm that is based on objectivity is not anywhere near true. What they're trying to do is keep us as people from understanding what's really going on.
You know, Paulie, they're going to talk about you and building Zone 51 down in Arizona or whatever, New Mexico, wherever it is, you know, where the aliens are.
Well, they did a study.
Well, we're conspirators.
So, all right, got the tin hat on. We'll talk about it as a tin hat, but let me just say that they did 10 of these Google searches regarding Hillary Clinton to try to find out what it would say about some of the negative things that are going on with Hillary Clinton. And they also did it for Bing. Now, for anybody who don't know what Bing is the equivalent of Google. It's just a different manufacturer. It's not nearly as pervasive as Google. Everybody understands Google, right? So we got Bing, and they did the exact same thing for Bing as they did for Google, and all of the negative things that were not popping up in Google were popping up in Bing. So that tells you that there was something done to the Google side of it. So I'm taking my tin hat off now.
Oh yeah, well, we have to Bing out of here. Folks, this is to be continued.
Lots
Hang on.
to talk about.
Until next week, don't hold your breath.